Hello, Professor Didi here, and this week what I'm going to talk about in Chapter 2 of the text on political behavior is human behavior, is to cover some of the information and give you an idea a little bit more in depth when thinking about the things in Chapter 2. Part of the chapter starts to deal with the issue of human rights. And human rights, various presidents have taken a very serious role in. President Biden, President Jimmy Carter, was a big supporter of human rights and based a lot of his foreign policy on it. And as you read further in the chapters, it'll talk about, civil liberties in Chapter 4, civil rights will get a little bit more discussed in Chapter 7. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about human rights in a sense, how some countries, it's a central doctrine of what they believe in. And for other countries, it becomes optional. And at times, countries will make foreign policy decisions based on what they see as their human rights interests or lack of interest. North Korea, they're not a big fan of that type of stuff. And at times, when it comes to human rights, we also talk about social justice. With human rights, it's worth asking whether such a thing as social justice actually exists. And, we think about this globally, but even in this country, there are some places where if you're part of the LGBT community, rights not as difficult. But in other parts of this country, you're discriminated against. And at times, even government officials will try to take actions to make your rights more difficult to achieve. And even to the point where some groups try to start boycotts against companies that want to promote social justice. And part of the difficulty in social justice at times deals with religion, where a lot of people have religious beliefs that are very strong, saying, that type of behavior I can't accept. Usually people finally come to accept the behavior when they discover members of their own community or family are part of those groups. And then people start to look at things a little bit differently. At times, during the course of the semester, you'll hear about terms such as libertarianism, which basically, in many ways, when you think about libertarian in general, a lot of it is government MYOB, mind your own business. And that could be a very effective tool, but sometimes you need the government to step in on a variety of things and matters. And social justice for a lot of minority groups, such as African Americans, and also groups such as Mexican Americans and other minority groups, it becomes more difficult. And a lot of groups have been fighting for social justice and equal rights and human rights for a long time in this country. And even when legislation passes, sometimes you can't change a person's heart or their minds. And that becomes very difficult to do. Men like Gandhi fought for social justice for many years in India. And he believed in nonviolence to solve the problem and to bring people to justice. The problem is Gandhi, a man of nonviolence like Dr. Martin Luther King, succumbed to violence in the end of their lives. And for a lot of people, when it gets into what the purpose of government is when it comes to this, a lot of people believe government should play an active role, such as President Johnson felt very strongly about this. Other people believe government shouldn't interfere in these things. That basically, people, communities should have the right to practice whatever they want to practice. And this became a mantra of people in the 1960s with the issue of states' rights. That basically states should be free to do what they want to do. If they want to discriminate and do things a certain way, that's part of their culture. You shouldn't interfere with it. Problem is, that's also wrong. When we get into other aspects, I'll talk about this a little bit more in some other videos about philosophers. Men like Hobbes, Locke, and John Stuart Mill talked about philosophy in relation to rights. And at times they would say that Burke especially, that basically he felt that man was equal in heaven, but on earth, people could be classified into certain groups of people. Doesn't sound fair, but philosophers at times have had a major role in deciding how to treat people. Even Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. At times when we look at rights and rulers, as far as who should rule, people talk about direct democracy, representative democracy, dictatorships. At times, people make the decision who rules by if they're unhappy, they will seek revolution. If they are unhappy, they will seek new governments through representative democracy. And what happens is for a lot of countries that practice authoritarianism, what they try to do is destroy civil society. Make the state, make the government the center of people's lives. And when you destroy civil society, like in places in Russia, the idea of democracy and freedom is more difficult for citizens to enunciate. And that becomes a problem. A couple other things I want to mention in relation to a lot of things. Why do humans make political choices they do? And a lot of it gets into a topic of political socialization, where basically people grow up a certain way, they're taught certain things, they live in certain environments, and a lot of those environments lead people to make the choices they want to make and behaviors they want to make. And it may sound awful, but if you grew up in a conservative household, Fox News is acceptable. If you grew up in a household of liberalism, MSNBC may be more acceptable to you. So the environment you're in can affect those things. And at times when it comes to voting choices, people will vote based on their self-interest at times more than the national interest. In other words, the country has terrible economic tensions, but my economic life is just fine. So I'll vote based on my own economic interests and not help other people. Or my economic interest is actually awful. But foreign policy, we need a steady hand. So people will often at times say, well, gosh, the foreign situation is good, but I care more about me first. And people do vote that way as far as making decisions. People will vote strategically. What's in their best interest? What will help them first? At times, voting is also a way to express ideas and opinions. In other words, you're frustrated with the government, an election day gives you a chance to vent your frustration, voting for who you want in office or who you don't want. In many ways, the Trump election in 2016 was a situation of people like the movie Network. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And people felt this was a way to express how they felt about things. And, when you think about people seek self-interest and the interests of others. Those are two opposite things, but people will think about their own interests first. But they do want to help humanity. I remember a quote a priest once said in church, and he said this about people. I love humanity, but I hate people. People will love the overall idea of helping one another, but sometimes they don't want to get involved in it. They'll write a check, they'll put money in a collection plate, whatever, to deal with these. And self-interest is important because people want to do better for themselves. They want to get ahead. They want to help their family. And at times people do make self-interest choices. That's not necessarily awful because we all make self-interest choices. What classes people take, what careers people want to do as far as things. People want to do things in their self-interest because they want to be happy. That's not necessarily wrong. And when we think about political behavior, the important thing is communication in political behavior. At times, political leaders don't do well enough in communicating what they really want or what they really think. And it's important to be able to communicate ideas, not just to other leaders, but the citizens, as far as how you want things. When it comes to human behavior, it can be somewhat predictable based on households. Certain people, here's how they're going to react to certain things. Other people, they may react totally the opposite when it comes to their own behavior and their own interests and self-interests. And if people grow up in a certain household and environment based on socialization, etc., they're going to react a certain way. People over 65, they may not have cared about Medicare when they were 25. But when you're 65, you want it protected. You want to make sure the government does everything in its power. Government caters to older voters because people over 65, 9 out of 10 of them vote. Why don't they care about people your age, people 20 to 30? Because you don't vote. Only 3 out of 10 people, 18 to 30, actually vote because they don't consider it important enough. Now, during the midterms in 2020, because of the Dobbs decision, you saw a strong uptick among Generation X voters, which is a good thing that people care about democracy, that participate. And participation is important. I often say, if you don't vote, don't bitch about the government you get. As I mentioned before, behavior is predictable, how people will react to certain things. When people are scared, they want security. At times when people are scared, they want stronger and tougher, more cops, stronger and tougher government. At times leading to authoritarianism. People in the 1930s in Germany They liked Hitler because Hitler projected strength. He was going to fix things. He was going to make Germany great again. And people were willing to give up freedom for economic security. It happens all the time. That sounds terrible and awful, but it does happen. People want to be secure. People want to be safe. And that happens. Political scientists at times, when looking at things, talk about theories like game theory and prisoner's dilemma as far as how to deal with things, predicting behavior using games, figuring out how people will react to certain things, how people will say, if I do this, how will this person react? And prisoner's dilemma is a common thing that's used when police interrogate people. The idea being flip someone so they will make a decision that leads you to the arrest and conviction a lot quicker. And I've often found game theory a fascinating thing, and political games can give you an idea how people react. Think of it more as far as the issue of gambling. There are some people that will roll the dice. There are other people that are more cautious in their betting behavior. And if you ever get a chance to take a course in game theory, and I did this in college, it's a fascinating study. Many of the aspects of the course were completely over my head 30 years ago. But it's fascinating how people react to certain things and participate in certain issues as far as how they seek things. When we think about goals people should seek in politics, yes, social justice is a wonderful thing. Getting things done, having government be efficient. People love to hate the government. In other words, they despise government. But they're happy when their trash gets picked up, and they're happy when government is running efficiently. And at times, political leaders like the attitude of let sleeping dogs lie. In other words, don't rile up voters, because if you rile them up, they'll go out and vote, they'll get active, they'll get angry. And you don't want that if you're a political leader. You want people, the best way to describe it, being dull, being complacent in many ways. In other words, a boring civil society. In other words, kind of what Russia has now. A couple last little things I want to mention as far as terms and vocabulary in some ways, not necessarily for this chapter, but down the road. I mentioned authoritarianism. A lot of this is creepy in society. Anne Applebaum recently wrote a book a few years ago, The Twilight of Democracy, and talked about how people are gravitating towards authoritarianism, a non-democratic form of government with centralized power, but also limited civil rights and civil liberties. That's not a good thing. Capitalism is essential to prevent authoritarianism because when people's economic lives are good, they don't complain as much. Money makes people think less about their problems of other things. Money cures a lot of aspects. During the course semester, as I mentioned, I'll talk about civil liberties and civil rights and how those play into effect. Direct democracy is a system of government where all decisions are made, usually by voting. It started with the Greeks through participation of all citizens. The problem is direct democracy would not be effective in the United States because of the fact that you could never get all citizens together that equally participate or understand their various interests in things. We have representative democracy, a system of government where we elect individuals to represent our interests within the legislature. The OER has a definition of social justice, and it's a good definition. The distribution of opportunities, resources, and rights within a community. The problem is, and I'll explain prejudice this way to kind of conclude everything. You are not born prejudiced. Prejudice is learned through family, friends, and experiences. That's how prejudice starts. And it takes kind of big thinking and big realization as people get older to realize, that stuff doesn't matter. Over the course of the semester, I'll have a variety of other videos about ideology, and videos about civil liberties and a variety of other topics for the course. Take care. Have a great day.